Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of South Asian Success. I'm so happy to have with me a fellow author, Mrinal, who I met recently at an event here in Chicago, but also a fellow entrepreneur and someone who has really taken on a lot of different paths in her career. And can't wait to talk to you all about what I kind of say, and many are calling multi-hyphenate entrepreneurs these days. So, Mrinal, thank you for joining. So wonderful to have you on. Would love for you to introduce yourself and share your journey with the audience.
Yes, hi. I am an author of two books on South Asian mental health and work as a business analyst full-time, as well as a part-time digital marketing, writing, and editing business owner.
Wow. Okay. So quite a vast career. Walk us through a little of the elements, right? What was first? What got you to the next phase? I think people's careers are often like built upon, right? So I'm kind of curious, how did the path lay out for you?
So I started out in the area of marketing communications when I first graduated college, having graduated with a bachelor's in marketing and a minor in journalism. And I was working in freelance journalism at the same time. And then a few years later, when I realized I wasn't making it into full-time reporting, I had a by chance, I kind of fell into a career as a BA at a manufacturing company, which was during the time of COVID. And then around the same time, I took a free memoir writing class and then became an author that same year when I learned just how easy it is to self-publish your own book these days. And then becoming an author opened doors for me into things like mental health and neurodiversity advocacy, public speaking, writing workshops, facilitation, and so much more. And now most recently, continuing my passion for writing and editing and digital, like on the side, in addition to being a full-time business analyst.
Wow. Okay. I love hearing about people wearing multiple hats. It's so exciting, this world we're in today. Tell us about this journey. Like, at what point were you kind of like, I don't know if this is the right step? Maybe imposter syndrome, maybe just a little scared. Like, what helped you overcome those challenges?
I would say that areas in which I might have felt like an imposter were when I would try to become a reporter and wasn't able to make it out of freelance. And it made me question, should I have studied journalism instead? And then when made the change from marketing communications to becoming a business analyst without any training, then that was another situation in which I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And then when I opened up my own like small business account recently and took on digital marketing, that was another area where I was like, should I have gotten more senior level corporate roles in marketing before I decided to start my own business too? But then I was like, I feel like becoming an author taught me more about brand building and marketing than any past job did at the same time.
I can definitely relate to that. I think becoming an author, I thought you just like write the book and be done. And then I realized the real work begins after you publish a book, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's designing workshops or designing, what comes next for your reader. Tell us about the books. I want to hear about the two books. Obviously, I know about one of them, which is how we met, but tell us about your books and what sparked those ideas.
Both books are anthologies with true stories written in third person about that cover topics like mental illness, neurodiversity, disability, intergenerational trauma, model minority myth, and the South Asian diaspora all across the world. And what I did is I interviewed people and then I wrote their stories in third person, almost journalistically in both books.
That's wonderful. So you kind of got to apply some of the skill sets from your education as well, it seems like.
Yes, and while also exploring different ways of writing too.
Okay, I love that. So I've heard about Taboo, right? And we're going to include the link for that in the show notes. I mean, I love the name because I think it just represents so much of South Asian culture and the things that we were often told, like, you can and can't talk about this. And tell us about some of the topics that you cover or that your interviews covered, and what was the goal in launching this most recent title?
Both books were anthologies and with true stories, different stories in both books. And basically, when I wrote book number one, it was during the pandemic. And what inspired that was the fact that living in Milwaukee, the most segregated city in the country, or second, I'm not sure which one it is now, I didn't meet any Desi people with a mental health related story or a therapy journey to share. And that became kind of my way of investigating the matter. And luckily, though, I did find a lot of like nonprofits and other public figures and business owners that are talking about it. And I think it's because the pandemic and things like increased rates all across the world in things like domestic violence, in loneliness, in anxiety and depression, unemployment forced people, I think, in South Asia to finally start talking. And basically what I did is I told them, I'm looking to tell people stories for this book I'm writing. And then submission calls for me. And then people responded to my submission calls. I gave them the option to change the name if they pleased.
Okay.
And then I interviewed them and I wrote their stories. Once I became published in book number 1 and kind of put myself out there in terms of public speaking, networking, I learned that there was more stories that needed to be told that weren't covered in book number 1, as far as more variety of things like diagnosis, different diagnoses, for example, experiences with things like domestic violence, sexual assault, child
Yeah.
abuse. And then, for example, too, no LGBTQIA identifying people were in book number 1, but a handful were in book number 2. Only 2 males were told their stories in book number 1, no matter how hard I tried to put out submission calls to get men to talk. But then there was more men and non-binaries that shared their stories in book number 2. And whether it's because I became better networked or stigma is finally reducing step by step, or a little bit of both, I can't say for sure.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's an interesting journey. And I do think that also speaks to a little bit like the culture, right? It's like the stigma around speaking up. And maybe your first book also opened up some doors or avenues for people to feel comfortable, right? To be able
Right.
to share their story.
And more people talking other than just myself.
Yeah. So are any of the stories your own? I'm curious, or, how did you sort of land on this topic and this subject matter?
No, none of the stories are my own. They're interviews done with other people. And then I wrote their stories in third person.
Okay. So yeah. So then what were your biggest learnings from the folks you talked to? What were the biggest learnings in the process?
I'm a pattern seeker and I tried to look for things like common grounds, even though every story has its nuances in both books. So in book number 1, anxiety and depression largely got covered. And I thought that's interesting because it makes me wonder if they carry less stigma than something like schizophrenia, for example. And then most people were girls that told their story, like I said in book number 1. The variety of diagnoses increased a little bit more in book number 2. And then a lot of people told their stories about domestic violence and child abuse in book number 2, much more than in book number 1 as well. And then, like I said, there was more LGBTQIA people. In addition to that, some common grounds that I found in the vast majority of stories are things like having in second generation and younger people, having parents that didn't take their struggle seriously until they became severe, for example, having parents or elders that looked down upon the idea of even just seeking a therapist, let alone something like taking psychiatric medicine, pushing them to not tell anyone outside of the household, pushing them to talk to family instead of therapist, using prayer, natural remedies only, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So kind of like promoting the idea of help is available, but you should only seek help in these ways because we didn't have these things growing up.
Oh, yeah. I think we can all relate to some degree of that, right? Of like, oh, this isn't a real problem, or like, we all just figured it out, kind of old way of thinking.
Right. And I think too that some other common grounds I found is that, recently, last year in 2024, I attended a conference on stigma in the South Asian diaspora in which I spoke. And one keynote speaker introduced the ideology of self-stigma and secondary stigma. Self-stigma being something like, I am unworthy because I'm mentally ill. Secondary stigma being you, he, she, they are unworthy because they're mentally ill. And I think that even though like everyone in my book has overcome that told me their stories has overcome so much and come so far, I think that I did pick up on some notions of the stigma that their families hold, passing on as some degree of self-stigma and not always feeling confident in admitting that, I might be struggling and I may need help outside of the household, and I deserve to be able to pursue the avenues that mommy and dad didn't.
What was the feedback or the reception from the community? Because I'm curious. I know I've seen how well your book has done at events, but I'm curious, what was the early reception, and what have you kind of felt is the community saying about your How about
Think, of course, everyone's going to mostly say positive things directly to me. And I think that, I've gotten like more specifically, I've gotten feedback that say, these are relatable. It made me feel less alone. Or I used it one time. I got someone saying that they used it as a tool and because they couldn't find therapists of Asian or Desi descent where they're from to be able to discuss why cultural norms matter in their healing process, for example. Now, an extended relative once said something like it was over a WhatsApp text, so I couldn't pick up on the tone, but said something like, your empathy and your frustration too is apparent or something like that. And I think she was referring to how I would directly pull quotes from people kind of complaining or venting about their parents saying, don't take medicine, don't see a therapist, or pressuring them to do things that they didn't want to do, like disapproving of their marital partners or pursuing a creative career, that type of thing. I think that
Yeah.
might have caused some elder people some discomfort hearing those things, even if few may say that directly to me, but it also may have kind of opened up some people's eyes. And I think that comment is where I was like, maybe I should seek more than one perspective per story. And I made it a point in book number 2 to be like, do you have family members that want to talk and tell their side too? And of course, very few said yes, but I thought it was at least worth putting out there.
I love that thoughtfulness. I mean, honestly, it's probably difficult to please everyone in anything that you do, right? As far as like a piece of writing or a piece of, whatever kind of art, it might not be for everyone, but I do feel like it sounds like people at least understood that you took the care to tell these stories as an empathetic, sort of narrator, right? Which is different. I don't know. It's a different position to take than many people probably have sought out to do. So I love that you did that.
Yeah, and I will say too, someone else did say, I can really sense the frustration in some of these people that you interviewed towards their elders, but at the same time, a lot of these people are expressing a degree of sympathy towards the elder generation at the same
Right.
time.
And we can be two things at the same time, right? It's kind of interesting that you've done this work, and I have a poetry collection coming out this spring. To be frank, and I haven't talked about this, it's written for probably like my generation, right? Or our generation. But when other people read it, there could be some people that take it a little, critically. So I can totally understand that discourse, right? And if you are being open and honest, it's your version of that honesty, right? So it's not for everybody. Kind of feels similar. Well, okay, so tell us about what you're working on with the book. I know that you've said you've done speaking engagements and things like that. What are some other things you might be working on? Any events coming up? Anything happening in your sphere?
I'm going to be a panelist at the South Asian Literature Festival, for one. And then I'm in the process of planning another event in Chicago that's in person. That's kind of like a networking mixer combined with a panel, but the details of that are still being fleshed out.
Wonderful. That's so great. And you are still managing these other businesses and things like that. What's your next kind of endeavor? Are you going to do a third book? Are you going to do something else? What else are you working on?
I don't know about a third book since it's only been 2023 since I published the last one. If I were to come up with something a little bit more unique than an anthology, I would be willing to consider it down the line for something, for example, but definitely won't ever stop writing at the very least, whether that's for things like other people, like other businesses and organizations, or creation of digital content and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Keep your voice out there. And then you have this journalistic background. So
Yeah.
obviously you can always share it. I do like that you approach this kind of as a journalist, which is a really interesting way to think about writing, for anyone that's seeking to do a project like this or something similar, really thinking of it from a journalistic standpoint and representing, right, those individuals. I can tell there's a lot of tie to like this work that you've than that you do. But how can others learn from your style? If I was going to undertake a project that has like sort of a sensitive spin, right? It can be challenging. How would you say to someone, hey, this is what I did to take steps to overcome that? Like you had to listen to tough stories. You had to write them down, represent them as best as possible, and make sure that you're appealing to a reader audience. So what are maybe some lessons learned from your perspective that others could take and impart into their work?
I would say that, like you said, it can keyword can be difficult. And I think that that's dependent on your experience level doing these things, as well as how, what your tolerance is to sensitive or emotionally intense things. Mine is relatively high.
Mhm.
And that comes from just both my personality as well as having been a journalist and being used to interviewing people and not being fearful of asking hard hitting questions. And I think that, however, one thing that maybe I did have to kind of change or adapt was when doing some of these interviews to maybe be less pert and maybe try to show more sensitivity for some of the things people are talking about, and maybe giving them a disclaimer saying, you don't have to talk about this so and so, or it's okay to, take a pause or think about it, so to speak. And I think that maybe scripting might be helpful for those who truly lack experience and do well in that rather than off the cuff communication. So, like, think about what you're going to say before you say it in at least a loose way before introducing yourself to people.
That's a great piece of advice, like following a script, following some guidelines, even maybe adding in notes for yourself to remind yourself to yeah, encourage somebody to feel more comfortable, or you don't have to overshare. I love that. Those are great insights, especially when working on like sensitive subject matter, right? I
Right.
think that's kind of the key here. I do it for the podcast. I mean, I write a script so that I know what I'm talking about. Let's shift a little bit of our gears to just talk about your entrepreneurial journey. You obviously are doing full-time work and you're wearing a hat as a business owner, doing digital marketing. Tell us a little bit about that. What kind of customers do you work with, and what sort of services are you offering?
This point, I only have like 2 or 3 clients, but the core services that I am offering are like website strategy and content creation and management, as well as for both website and social media, and as well as writing and editing assistance in the area of instructional documentation and things like digital, so like web content writing and editing as well. And also, I have helped 2 authors self-publish their own book. So if
Love
that's
it.
something else people want to come to, I do offer free consultations for that, and can also help guide people through like choosing a publishing avenue and assisting with writing and editing.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, so many different kind of ways to potentially connect and work with you depending on what somebody's working on. And then what kind of lessons learned or advice would you share to budding entrepreneurs? Like, you've obviously taken on trying different things, really exploring different avenues for your own growth. If somebody was going to say to you, "Hey, I'm thinking about being an entrepreneur," what kind of advice do you give them? What should they like maybe think about before they take that step?
I will go back to something that I learned in the 11th grade when I took a marketing your own business class. Wanting to make your own hours or not liking being told what to do is not a good reason to be an entrepreneur. You don't even have to be passionate about what you're doing as an entrepreneur, but you do have to have a passion for excellence.
Mm.
And the only reason that I even decided to open up my own school, but then I thought, why not just start it now? And then so I can compare how much I'm making on W-2 to how much I'm making in a business per year, so that anything I do that's not W-2 related, such as my book sales, my workshops, my public speaking, and my on the side marketing gigs, go into that account. And then if, business does particularly well and I start getting lots of others, then I could take the next step to converting to LLC and like marketing my business more aggressively, so to speak. And I will say too that sometimes I think that entrepreneurship is overglorified in the real world. What they don't always say is that, sometimes you need to downgrade your lifestyle to initially become an entrepreneur, because the pay is lower, you get more taxes taken out, and so on and so forth. And then there's the idea that so many businesses fail within the first years. That's something you're prepared for and have financial backing for and want to keep on pushing if that does happen to you, so to speak. And more importantly, working for somebody else is not inferior to being an entrepreneur or vice versa.
That's what's so interesting that you mentioned all these points, because I just read an article in Forbes
Or
that a lot of women are leaving full-time work and pursuing entrepreneurship. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we know there's challenges placed on women in the household or as caretakers or other things. It's really interesting to hear you say that because I think there is a bit of a glorification on what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And like that, maybe it's easier. Technically, it is more work because you're now your marketing department, your sales department, your support team, right? All the things. So I like how you put it, don't necessarily think of it as this is going to give me the hours that I want to work, but maybe pursuing a path that you think you can actually provide some solid quality work at. That's the path. That's really interesting take. I love that.
And I think too that, and I have met people that are like, I genuinely cannot work for someone else. That's respectable and a valid reason to get into entrepreneurship too. I think the reason why it's over glorified is because of mindsets that we have and mindsets that society has drilled into us in terms of one's ability to contribute to capitalism. People on the top of the ladder in an organization are better than just a worker beneath them, that someone who goes into business themselves is superior or more independent to someone who is dependent on someone else to find them work, for example.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of, everybody has their paths and their reasons, but, I think attributing it to like, it is hard work. It is going to be hard work. You and me can go both attest to that. And there are going to be deliverables and people to report to and everything, right? If you have clients, you're still expected to kind of work for them in some regard. So it's figuring out what really works for you and what that balance is. Yeah. Well, it's been really cool to talk to you. I think this is, what's interesting about having all these conversations is for me, it's like our culture and the norms have so long been focused around like a career, a job, a thing that you do, right? That you invest a lot of yourself into. And in 2026, I think we're seeing more people exploring the different avenues of themselves and trying things out. So I'd love to see how you have pieced together even your parts of your education to build your current state and your whole. So this was a wonderful chat. Any last notes or thoughts to impart on anyone if they are considering authorship or an entrepreneurial journey? Any last thoughts from you?
Yes, I will always be here if you want to hit me up for a consultation. And then too, you can check out my books on Amazon too.
Yes, for sure. We'll drop the links in the chat. Thank you so much, Mrinal. I hope this is inspiring to somebody that is thinking about embarking on a new path, maybe trying a writing project or really considering entrepreneurship. You've got some really great nuggets of wisdom here to share with everyone. And until the next time, we'll see you again at South Asian Success. Thanks, Mrinal. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to South Asian Success. If this episode resonated with you, we hope that you'll share it with a friend or someone else who could resonate with it as well. And if you love what we're doing and building, please do rate us on whatever podcast method you stream on. Any reviews will help us grow and improve this platform. And if you are interested in joining us or talking more about your journey, please be sure to reach out. Take care.